Now that the dust has settled and the months-long Damian Lillard saga has ended in Portland, it's time to talk about what is an extremely exciting young group here in Portland, what this team is going to look like over the next couple of seasons, where they stand in terms of future and exciting young cores around the league. I can't wait to see what this team looks like this season. So first, let's talk about kind of what they got in return for Dame and what they were attempting to do here, and then we'll get into exactly what the future of the team looks like. So it was clear once we kind of figured out exactly what they got from Milwaukee and then ultimately trading Drew Holiday away, they really feel strongly about the perimeter players that they have, those being Shaedon Sharpe, Anthony Simons, and of course Scoot Henderson, who they just drafted. And that's kind of their core. That's their group. They're like, you know what? We're good on perimeter, high level scoring guys, and we want to have a well-rounded roster. We want to constantly have an idea of just how good Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, and Anthony Simons are. We want to have other competent players around them. We want to have guys that can guard. We want to have guys that can rebound. We want to have a five-man in Deandre Ayton that we think fits alongside that timeline. While we have the payroll to be able to pay him a ton of money, let's just see if this is a guy, a foundational piece for us. And they wanted to always make sure, rather than in contrast of some of these other rebuilds that we've seen over the last handful of seasons that are all about, let's just tank. Let's just see what we have. Let's tank, and then we'll, continue to add talent, having one of the best picks in the draft every single season. But you don't really have those complementary players there that allow you to fully kind of see what your team is going to look like in the following few seasons. Portland went the opposite direction, and they said, you know what? We feel good about these guys. Let's just see how this looks. And that, to me, was the foundation of the Damian Lillard trade. And honestly, the reason that Dame requested the trade in the first place, because once they realized they could get Scoot potentially with the third pick, they were like, we're not trading the pick. I think this basically what I think happened in Portland was they told Dame, okay, we're going to look to trade the pick. We're going to look to add a veteran. Then they moved up in the lottery like, oh, we have a chance to get Scoot. And then they looked around the league and realized we're not really going to get a ton in exchange for this pick that's going to help Dame as much as Scoot is going to help us long term. And so they ended up with I think one of the more interesting and potentially really successful rebuilds over the next couple of seasons, because I love Scoot. I love some of the young talent they have on their roster. And importantly, it's a roster that makes sense, and it's a roster that still has pieces that they can trade away. They signed Jeremy Grant to the massive contract when they thought that Dame was going to come back. Obviously that didn't happen, but Jeremy Grant is still going to be someone that teams around the league are going to see value in. Obviously it's a huge contract, but if there's a team out there that's okay paying that, you can get some value out of Jeremy Grant should you want to move on from him. You can also potentially get some value out of someone like Malcolm Brogdon or Robert Williams if these guys don't fit in to what you want. But importantly, for the Trailblazers, they can begin this season and kind of be like what Utah was at the beginning of last year, where you look at the team and you're like, wait, there's actually a lot of talent here. And yes, some of it's young and some of it's, veterans like Jeremy Grant, but this is a real NBA roster. This is not the Pistons of the last few seasons. This is not the Rockets of the last few seasons. And it's going to really help them in terms of not only the development of their young players, but also the evaluation of them and figuring out exactly where they stand, which I think is one of the failures of a lot of these like tanking-esque rebuilds, is you can have a guy score 20 points per game and not actually be all that good for when you actually want your team to be good. And it's really difficult to tell that if you don't have a legitimate roster around them. And I say all that to say that not only did they handle the Dame trade really well, which I've already talked about in previous videos, but I think this is a team that, again, similar to that Utah situation, is probably going to be better sooner than we think, because it's not one of those Detroit, Houston, a couple of other teams style rebuilds. It's a little bit more in that framework of let's still be good. Let's still be decent. We don't want to be the process Sixers here and win 10 games. We still want to have this be a good environment for our young players. And you add to that, by the way, all of the future first round picks that Portland has at their disposal. And a lot of these picks that are pretty far down the road, multiple 2029 unprotected firsts. They have an extra first round pick in this upcoming draft from Golden State. And rather than having, 20 firsts the way that OKC has had over the last couple of seasons, they just have assets. Like a 2029 first round pick for a rebuilding team is perfect, because you don't have to use it. You don't have to worry about how the team fits. You don't have to worry about, oh, do we want to draft for fit or do we want to draft the best player? You just have the pick and you have the opportunity to move it. Maybe if you are better, quicker than you think, you can, go out and get someone that's really going to help your team. You can use it to dump salary. This is a team in a front office that I think handled the Lillard situation perfectly. I'm interested to see if the way they handled the situation in terms of taking their time, waiting on the situation to develop, is something that's going to have a carryover effect to future star trade situations. Obviously, this one's unique because it happened in the middle of the offseason, so they had a couple of months to wait. But the bottom line of all this is they've set themselves up incredibly well. And when you think about and compare them to other rebuilds that we've seen over the last couple of seasons, obviously some of them more successful than others, I see them more are kind of on the track of the Oklahoma City Thunder kind of rebuild, where you look at the roster and you're like, okay, yes, this is a very young group. They're still figuring out a lot of stuff, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 seasons, Portland is winning 45 games. I think Scoot can be that good. I think they've got a lot of pieces on the roster, and I'm really intrigued, quite frankly, by the Deandre Ayton of all of this, because he's kind of the perfect asset for a rebuilding team that's in the situation that Portland is in, because apart from Jeremy Grant, they don't have big contracts, nor are they really going to have any big ones, over the next couple of seasons, because they just drafted Scoot. Shaedon Sharpe's a second-year player. They've got Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant, Deandre Ayton. Like, those are their 3 big deals. So it's okay taking on the big deal of Deandre Ayton while you figure out if there's something here. He was drafted first overall for a reason, and it's distinctly possible that people that, give their opinions and analyze the game all the time, as well as people within the league, are undervaluing who Deandre Ayton can be because of the big contract. That kind of stuff happens all the time, where a player is this good and then they sign a big contract and they're still this good, but now everybody views them down here because they signed some big deal and it's not as good of value. It's not as efficient of a deal as when you're on a rookie contract the way that Deandre Ayton was. And I say all that to say, this feels like a team that, in contrast to some of the other teams around the league, rebuilding or not, has a real, true, strong direction. They know where they're going. They knew what they were doing when they got the package in exchange for Dame that they did. They knew what they were doing when they got the package in exchange for Drew Holiday that they did. And they knew what they were doing when they decided to go ahead and reset and build around their team. They might not have wanted to do it unless Dame told them that he wanted out. It's one of the reasons why they waited so long, when honestly it probably made sense a few years ago to go ahead and trade away Damian Lillard. But now that they've done it, I feel really confident in the decision-making process of this front office, as well as the overall direction of the team. Now, obviously, it's going to depend heavily on how good Scoot Henderson actually is, on how good Shaedon Sharpe actually is. It's cool to think about their potential and their upside right now, but you need to see actual, strong development from those guys. And Scoot Henderson is by no means a perfect prospect, despite the fact that I really like him a lot. It's also going to depend on how he and Anthony Simons can coexist in the backcourt. Or is that something that you need to, evaluate and potentially move on from Simons over the next couple of seasons? But all of the questions that Portland has right now, is DeAndre Ayton going to be worth the contract? Is he really, the long-term answer at the 5? What do you do with the Jeremy Grant deal? Is Anthony Simons going to fit alongside Scoot? All the questions that they have are totally fine for a rebuilding team. There's no, we don't know if we have the guy yet, because they're still trying to figure it out. And I think Scoot Henderson's going to be the guy. There's no, we have too many perimeter players and we have to pick 2 of them and we can't figure out who we should keep. There's no, we don't have any leaders on the team, no veteran presence. There's no, we don't have any defenders. We don't have a well-rounded roster. Our 5-man is terrible. They don't have any of that. Every question they have about their roster, if you gave that question to some of the other rebuilding teams around the league, they'd be like, hey, these are good problems to have. Portland has just set themselves up in a fantastic situation, and I fully expect that a couple of years from now, we're going to look back on this offseason for them specifically, as well as the Damian Lillard trade, and think this is where they've really started to turn things around, and the future in Portland, to me, is extremely bright.